So South Africa was starting to think and act like a brand. It was prepared for that. The conception of brand South Africa came into being with a very clear objective.
When he started, actually, he called together a grouping of very influential people around the world and said, look, we need to do something about economic growth in our country. We need to do.
So South Africa has now often positioned itself as the gateway to Africa for trade, investment, tourism, and now business.
And so what brings the BRICS countries together is commonly, the intent to obviously improve their socio-economic conditions, to improve trade between themselves.
Recognize that business events generate 1.6 trillion in global GDP, and projections estimate around $2.5 million by 2035. Meetings Africa and TIFA are transforming South Africa into a hub for international business events.
And for the African continent in particular, which currently enjoys less of 5% of the market share globally, it is a new market that everyone is looking at, because a lot of African destinations have realized that it's a very, very lucrative market, and it is important to pursue that.
For decades, the word Africa in global headlines was often paired with tragedy, famine, war, corruption, a continent defined by its wounds rather than its wonders. But something began to change. You could feel the rhythm shift. It was 2010, the FIFA World Cup. The world's most watched event came to South Africa, and for the first time, Africa wasn't a backdrop to disaster, but the stage for triumph. The world heard Waka Waka, this time for Africa for the first time, and it was electric. For me personally, it's still unforgettable. Many World Cups have come and gone, but nothing since has quite captured the same spirit, that pulse, that pride, that sense of arrival. Waka Waka wasn't just a song, it was a signal that Africa had arrived and that its story was changing. A new narrative was being written, from survival to success, from pity to possibility. A continent rebranding itself as a land of opportunity, growth, and hope. And behind that transformation are storytellers, marketeers, and visionaries who understood something profound. That perception is capital. Today, I'm speaking with one of those architects of perception, Matola, a man who has helped turn the lens on Africa from a continent of crisis to a land of opportunity, frontier growth, and vibrant culture. We'll explore how nations like brands are built and how Africa is shaping its own narrative of power, progress, and pride. I warmly welcome you, Miller, to my PTM podcast. Where are you joining us from today?
Thank you, Adeeba. I'm joining you from Johannesburg. Nice cloudy day. We are going into our summer, as you know now.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for accepting the invitation and agreeing to talk with us. You have said before that perception is the world's most undervalued currency. What you first looked at Africa's global image, what did you see and what did you change? What did you want to change?
Well, I think you touched on the kind of characterization that we saw of Africa in the early days. If you think back, let's say, 2 decades ago, so even back, there was this very gloomy look at Africa and perceptions about what Africa stands for. And in many cases, the narrative was very negative. And some of it obviously justified by some of the conflicts on the continent, justified by images of hunger and images of starvation and so forth. And I think we knew that it was critical that from 2 points, one in terms of action and another in terms of telling the story, we needed to do something about it. And I think you started to see a new generation of leaders that believed in Africa's possibilities and believed that you could change Africa, not just in terms of the narrative and the story, but in terms of actions. And I think you saw that coming together starting 2 decades ago, when there was greater focus on Africa, creating bigger markets in Africa. For instance, what today is now the African Continental Free Trade Area. the discussions around these go back. We need to start trading with each other more. We need to have more cultural exchange with each other. And those are some of the building blocks of building very strong nations. But also for those of us then who were in the business of promoting the locations or destinations for either investment or tourism, it became very important that we also know and find stories that were very positive about the
So,
continent
so
and be
Miller,
able
I
to
want
tell
to
those stories.
ask how much of the Africa's challenge was reputational versus structural? So, in other words, I want to ask that was it bad governance or just bad storytelling?
It is a combination of both, Adeeba. There were instances where there was really challenges around governance, bad governance, where you had leaders who had been in power for a long time did not were not intent on leaving, but also were not leaving a positive legacy. But on the other side, it was in some large extent our inability to really pick up on those very positive stories in some of the countries which were happening, whether you were looking at countries like Botswana, Namibia, including South Africa as well. Stories of change in countries like Mozambique, which had emerged out of a civil war, and when we were starting to rebuild the economy. And if you looked around, a lot of these countries, their economies were growing significantly, which showed that although it was coming from a very low base, which showed that indeed there were changes and the leaders who had come into power that were trying to change the narrative. And the storytellers, in some ways, sometimes were not always catching up with these stories until I think it was the book that was written who said, Africa is almost open for business by one of our own here, which really checked those countries where there were positive stories.
Right. So South Africa was starting to think and act like a brand. It was prepared for that. The conception of brand South Africa came into being with a
Mhm.
very clear objective to change how the world sees not just South Africa, but the African continent as a whole as well. From a region defined by its challenges to one defined by its potential. So
Yeah,
if we look at the population, it's 1.5 billion people across the continent. It's a huge
yeah,
market,
huge
and the
market.
second most, yeah, the second most populous in the world. So
Mm.
South Africa, as one of its most dynamic economies, this wasn't just about now image only. It was also about proving its competitiveness, right? So what was the
Correct.
thinking? Yeah. So what was the thinking behind the creation of brand South Africa, and what problem was it really trying to solve at that time?
Thanks, Adiba. The brand South Africa was really, if you think about it, the brainchild of President Thabo Mbeki. When he started, actually, he called together a grouping of very influential people around the world and said, look, we need to do something about economic growth in our country. We need to do something about transformation and actually developing our country, but not just our country, the African continent as well. You will recall that he was the one who was very strong on the issue of the African Renaissance. So with these influential people that he called together, he was really trying to build what at the time they called the International Marketing Council, which was intended to then market South Africa, but in the process also market Africa. And the idea was really to address exactly what you said about the perceptions about the continent, which were primarily negative, but at the same time, create opportunities to position and profile South Africa and the rest of the continent as investable locations and destinations. So there were two prongs. It was a two-pronged approach. One was to deal with the negatives in terms of perception, and to build the image of the country. But what the plan to build the image was to ensure that we did those things that earned us the reputation that we deserved as a country that was starting to emerge from a colonial past into a democratic future.
So it was a perfect alignment between perception and policy, right?
Correct, correct, yes. Because the large part of it was around the policies and the implementation of those policies.
Right. So, South Africa has now often positioned itself as the gateway to Africa for
Mm,
trade, investment, tourism, and now business events as well.
correct.
If I look back in 2010, South Africa inclusion into BRICS marked a pivotal moment,
Yeah.
signaling its emergence as a key player in global trade. Fast forward today, and the nation is still leveraging this position to redefine its economic landscape. So, Amila, with South Africa's BRICS membership, how does the
Yeah.
country leverage this position to strengthen its business events sector and global trade partnerships?
Look, I think the BRICS offers a very solid opportunity for South Africa to build new relationships in terms of international relations, but also to build relationships with countries that potentially have something to from a point of view of trade, from a point of view of investment, as well as cultural exchange. And so, what brings the BRICS countries together is commonly, the intent to obviously improve their socio-economic conditions, to improve trade between themselves. Because largely, you find a lot of African countries don't trade between themselves; they trade largely with other countries. But the BRICS offers a very unique opportunity for countries to then develop and grow their trade relations, their cultural relations, as well as obviously to grow investment between themselves. The fact that the BRICS membership now is growing with the inclusion of other countries that were not there also serves to strengthen, in our view, cooperation, not just with the main member states, but I think it will also help to support cooperation between for South-South relationships with some of the new countries that are coming in. And I think that way it will help strengthen, obviously, not just economic diplomacy, but actual trade between these countries. Because we know that in many ways, trade and culture are very critical in terms of building relations between countries. And I think that for us has been a very important element for South Africa.
Yes, absolutely. Considering now moving forward with this emergence of business events, right? It's a new niche in the tourism category as well, and
Yeah.
it has been recognized that business events generate 1.6 trillion in global GDP, and
Mm.
projections estimate around 2.5 million dollars by 2035 in the mobile events market. So, initiatives like Meetings Africa and TIFA are
Mhm.
transforming South Africa into a hub for international business events. So,
Yes.
what impact have these platforms had on Africa's economic growth?
Look, business events is, as you've rightly said, a billion-dollar business across the globe, and for the African continent in particular, which currently enjoys less of 5% of the market share globally. It is a new market that everyone is looking at because a lot of African destinations have realized that it's a very, very lucrative market, and it is important to pursue that market. But what that does, the business events do not only contribute towards economic impact, but they also contribute quite a lot towards knowledge exchange, towards cultural exchange, the development of new technologies, and also, again, the issue of trade. And for African countries now, you will see that there is an increase in not only becoming members of international associations like ICA, but also in setting up convention bureau, which are specifically aimed at targeting business events and attracting them to the continent. And by so doing, we are contributing not only to the cultural capital, but also we are contributing to business development and also cross-border trade, especially within the continent. So a lot of governments are actually starting to see the attractiveness thereof and how business events can help contribute towards the transformation of societies, creation of employment, developing the skills that are needed for the sector, but also resulting in the development of infrastructure because it does call for creating the infrastructure that's required. So they have a very huge impact in terms of contributing to the economic development within a region or a country. And we have seen that happening in South Africa, with South Africa increasingly hosting major events.
Yes, yes. So TIFA, in a sense, is helping and playing an instrumental role in promoting Africa as a business, as a global business destination. So recently, you have successfully organized the second edition of TIFA, and it was hosted in Richards Bay, a
Yes.
city with both industrial significance and growing tourism potential. Why was this destination chosen, and how does hosting TIFA there amplify the objectives?
Well, Adeeba, look, this was the third edition that we hosted. And as you rightly say, we hosted it in Richards Bay. Our focus is really on profiling and promoting underserviced, or what we call second or third tier cities and regions. We're profiling them
That's
as
very unique philosophy, actually. Usually the organizers pick up the ones that are the most glamorous destinations, and it's a very community uplifting thought to be
yes,
organizing it in locations or venues that really need some attention for
yeah,
growth.
yeah. Well, that's correct, because for us it's really about it's about local economic development. How we localize economic development. And so that's why we focus on a second or third tier cities or underserviced regions. Why we hosted it in Richards Bay? It's exactly the same. Richards Bay is a second tier city, but we just got one of the deepest seaports that we have. It's increasingly growing in terms of exports, but also the manufacturing base that is there. But an important aspect for us from a tourism point of view, Adeeba, is that Richards Bay actually serves as the gateway into the interior, into Maputo land and Zulu land, where you can experience Zulu culture, heritage, and you can also access all the World Heritage sites further north of Richards Bay. So it is a very important gateway into this hub of tourism and culture and heritage. And that is why we hosted it there. But they also had some significant projects that we wanted to showcase. They have a waterfront development. They are planning to build an international convention center. There are 2 hotel developments that they are planning. So there's a number of developments that really were behind our decision to choose hosting it in Richards Bay as a secondary city.
Yeah, so on this platform, bringing the investors and the projects on under one platform, and then helping them, facilitating them actually in signing the MOUs. Now that's just the beginning point of the entire journey.
Yeah.
So how do you ensure through these platforms, through these initiatives, that the benefits, the tangible benefits, are being translated to local communities, businesses, and broader African economies?
Thanks. There's 2 ways. In the long term, Adeeba, it's through us assisting to raise capital for the projects. It's through us assisting to get investors who may have an appetite for the projects that are presented. And that in the long term is what helps those destinations then create the value that they need from a socio-economic point of view. But in the short to medium term, part of what we do is to ensure that when we go to a host city like that, or a host region or a village, we use facilities, we use resources from that area. We never go there with a very big team from Johannesburg, but we'll go in there and utilize all the services that the locals can offer. And through that, we are able to create, in the short to medium term, economic benefits. We are able to create employment for the locals, the local host communities. So that is how we really try to balance the short to medium term benefits with the long term benefits. And obviously, we'll track some of the MOUs that are signed to see if it translates into any tangible investment.
Right. So now I want to dig deeper into technology as well. So you
Okay.
see, South Africa has transitioned from FIFA 2010's global spotlight to strategic development of brand South Africa, and
Yeah.
then to into business events like meetings Africa and TIFA. And now want to know that how technology is really shaping the next chapter of the country's evolution.
I think technology is very core to where the country is going. One of the key areas is obviously industrialization, but at the base of industrialization is technology itself. And I think technology is going to revolutionize the way we do business in every aspect of life and economic life. There is a move towards digitalization, because digitalization is what is going to create more economic value. If you take the sector that we are involved in, for instance, if you want to develop a small, medium enterprises, some of the solutions that you need to give is around technology and innovation. is around basic things such as payment systems. If you are going to start transacting across borders like we are trying to do, so technology and payment solutions become very, very important. And that is why you are seeing that even in the area of tourism investment, the biggest chunk of investment these days is going more and more towards technology, whether it's fintechs or whether it's travel techs. You are seeing a lot of technology going in that direction. And it's actually opening up space for the inclusion of, in our case, communities and the persons that were previously not part of the mainstream economy. And through technology, they are able to be able to participate, to trade, do business,
Absolutely.
and improve their quality of life.
Absolutely. It intersects with tourism, investment, and trade. So, what is the current landscape of innovation in South Africa like today, especially in artificial intelligence and digital infrastructure and smart business solutions?
Look, like all countries, I think we are all, really moving ahead in terms of adopting technology, but also adopting largely, artificial intelligence, for example. You will see it in the development of not just the data centers and across the country, where there's a very, very strong move in investing in those areas in terms of data centers, because we understand that data technology are going to be the big drivers of industry in the country. So South Africa is at the forefront of this. You know that we have a state technology agency, for an example, that assists with that. But we also have an innovation agency that focuses on innovation in technology from a government point of view to support technology adoption, not only in terms of government, to also try and support the e-government, for example. In the area of e-commerce, that is largely being also driven by private sector. So private sector harnessing technology to drive e-commerce. A few years back, e-commerce wasn't as big in South Africa, but now it's very big. It's been driven, for example, amongst other things, by COVID. Post-COVID, we started to see quite a lot of shift in terms of e-commerce, which then required the platform such as for technology, for instance, to drive that. You talk about other areas, it's like blockchain technology, for instance, is starting to be used increasingly in many areas, whether it's in the area of agriculture, in the area of manufacturing. We're starting to see that permeating every aspect of life and industry in South Africa. And I think it is technology is identified as one of those, not only an enabler, but one of the critical areas that need to be developed in order to fast track development, increase the growth in our economy, and obviously, as I said, enhance trade and investment.
And if we just look at the demographics of South Africa, it's basically a young country. So, how is youth population influencing the way businesses, technologies, and investment strategies are being designed and executed?
Well, I think the good thing about us and the continent being a very young continent, including South Africa as being a young continent, is that technology adoption for the young people is very, very easy. They have no fear or phobia for technology, so it's very easy for them to adopt it. And that is why it is one of the easiest ways through which we are able to involve them in industry, because they are able to come up with very strong innovations. And we've seen quite a lot of innovations coming out of young people in this continent and in South Africa who are using technology for a variety of reasons. We've seen a young girl producing some almost some earphones, but that are used for security purposes. And this is just a teenager. So you're seeing a lot of young people adopting the technology, and because they have no phobia for it, because they have an affinity with it, they are better able to scale and use it, or to come up with innovations that can be scaled into fundable projects. And that is why it's important to ensure that we include youth and women in our economic development strategy.
Yeah. So, for young Africans looking to make a mark, what sectors or opportunities do you think you can highlight in technology, in tourism, business events, or trade to help them shape the continent's global narrative, to carry on that baton?
I think technology is an enabler across all sectors. And for our young people, my advice would really be that they ensure that they can adopt technology to solve real life problems that exist on the ground. And I think it is through coming up with technological innovations that address real life issues that they'll be able to make a contribution to the economy of the continent, but in the same time, be able to build something for themselves that will help better their lives going forward. So look for solutions that are going to be very practical in terms of looking at solving real life problems that exist. Like I'm saying, payment problems, for instance, payment solutions were a key challenge on the continent. And what happened? We used cell phone technology to leapfrog and be able to provide payment solutions for people who were never banked before, who were not bankable. So it's a case that if young people can look and find solutions like those, they could find them in agriculture, for example, ag tech, technologies that help people, improve crop qualities and improve their output. That is something that young people can also contribute towards. In the area of education, in the area of manufacturing, there are many areas. In tourism, as I said, travel tech, people looking at experiences that are digitized these days. Young people are best able to do these kinds of things. And I would say it solves a solution, it solves a problem, whether it's a problem of people wanting to experience Africa without having to travel, or whether it's people who want to transact with other people across the border. If you come up with solutions that are very practical and meaningful, they will certainly be able to be scaled, they can be funded, and young people can actually build strong businesses out of those.
Right. Very inspirational. Looking ahead, how do you envision South Africa balancing its rich cultural identity, historical context, and then global ambitions lying ahead, from sports and business events to AI and innovation? So, what would be the next chapter in its story?
Well, I think as a pretty young democracy, I think we have huge opportunities to explore those. When you talk about business events, there are a host of other business events that we have not had the opportunity to host in this country that we can pursue. And in that respect, I think, for example, to give you just one that the country's been seized with, is the Formula One, for instance. We are currently hosting the G20 in this country. And so as we increasingly have a kind of a voice in the international, the global marketplace, we can increasingly use our heritage, our culture, to not only influence the direction where things go, but also be able to influence trade. As we get a seat at the table in some of these multilateral institutions, we have a very strong voice and case to make in terms of transforming those institutions to better humankind and better the quality of life of citizens across the globe, to improve inclusion of women, inclusion of youth. So as we make these strides as a young democracy, find a seat at the table, I think the best way we can change things is use the opportunity to transform those institutions from within, but also create an opportunity for inclusion of younger people and women. And at the heart of it all is technologies, because through technology we are now in a position to be in places where we couldn't have been. We are able to be in markets where we could otherwise not have been, and to reach audiences that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to reach.
Now, my next question and my last question is a little bit personal. So, we all need a little bit admiration and a little bit of acknowledgement, and a pat on back is not too bad.
Yeah.
It's good for health, and it really sparks further curiosity and creativity to pursue what we are doing. So, finally, when people look back 20 years from now, what would you like them to say about South Africa's evolution and your role in shaping its narrative as a land of opportunity?
Well, I would really like to see it as a country that helped to, in many ways, shape the trajectory of humanity, especially in instances of human rights, for example. Our culture is strongly steeped in what our founding fathers like Nelson Mandela tried to teach us, to look at humanity and say, what can we do for humanity, whether we are a small country or a big country, but we always have to try to stand on the side of human rights, on the side of what is right for humanity to prosper. And in my view, I'd like to South Africa as one of those countries that has been able to make a contribution in that respect. It has been able to make a contribution in how Africa is seen and perceived.
Miller, thank you so much for joining us today. Your insights on South Africa's journey from FIFA glory to brand South Africa to business events, TIFA, and the emerging technology landscape have been incredibly inspiring. It's clear that the future of Africa is bright, and your work is really helping to shape that narrative. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your vision and your experience with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me, Adeeba, and I hope we can do the next podcast from somewhere in Africa.
Absolutely.